Okay, Martin, we connected a number of years ago. Your large community caught my attention, the People group. For anyone who's listening is in the HR space, you've got to check out the People group. It is massive, it's growing, it's active. It is, I would say, probably North America's largest HR and people ops group on Slack. And I'm just so excited to have you on the podcast. I hope I did you justice with that intro. Was that okay?
No, thank you so much. Very kind. I would love to take largest, uh, the largest title. There's definitely a few larger ones out there. The sneaky marketing thing that I like to say is that we're the most engaged, and I feel
Yeah.
confident and honest about saying that when I look at the community in comparison. So yeah.
Yeah, and just to even compare that with a community of those who live with an invisible condition, because that's what we're going to be talking about. Just your
Mm,
journey here in a sec. There's there's more and more people. Just even before we hit record, there's so many people now, at least on this podcast, saying, "Hey, it's time to share my story. I want to share my story."
mm,
I haven't
yeah.
created a community. I've thought about it. It's something in the back of my mind, but um, you know, today we're going to talk about you. This is about your journey living with an invisible
Finally,
condition.
somebody wants to
Fine.
listen to me.
Yeah, we're here to listen. I could probably sit here for an hour, just listen to myself talk. At least that's what my wife would say. But I don't think I'd get too many downloads on that episode. So why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, briefly about your story, your diagnosis, what you live with. I'm just going to leave it for you for a couple minutes.
Sure. No. Thanks for having me on and suggesting that I kind of take that step. I'm really grateful that you and I crossed paths in the way that we did, and yeah, I would say maybe before we met or just recently, I was in the midst of like going through the diagnosis process. And what I have is inattentive ADHD. And I'm 38 years old. And I got diagnosed about 2 years ago when I was 36. And the that came out of a breaking point for me, which was I've got this project due for work at my previous employer. It was a presentation, and it took like every ounce of mental willpower for me to do something that probably takes people like 30 minutes tops, right? Like really talented people, who build slides and decks all day long. And this is like a digital asset basically of just like I'm going to get my knowledge and put it on a paper. Like 15, and I had 2-3 weeks to do it, and I left it to the last minute again. And it was like 2 or 3 in the morning. I was in front of my laptop just like crawling to the finish line of this deadline, exhausted because I'm like a new dad at this point. I've got a little one on the, a baby is coming, and a 2 year old at the time, and a wildly supportive, encouraging wife. And I'm just like trying to keep my crying down at 2 in the morning in front of the laptop because I just literally can't get this presentation out of me. I don't know why. I've been there so many times before, and there's this weird difference of like on the flip side of that, the next day when I have to do the presentation, things go well, and the time and the effort there, but the 2 weeks leading up to it was just mentally exhausting. There's so many times I could have done stuff. So at that point I was like, what's wrong? Why am I so broken? Why does this always happen? This can't be normal for other people. And started uh, looking into things that I'd kind of assumed for a really long time, and things that had I don't know necessarily worried me, but it didn't feel right to say that, like, oh, that's me too, right? Like, because the inattentive piece of ADHD is that you don't exhibit the like stereotypical behaviors of like, he's really hyper and bounces off the walls and it's just like really high emotions all the time. If anything, I'm the opposite. I'm like completely monotone, poker faced all the time, and whatnot. So I didn't necessarily associate myself with all of that. And I guess the one thing to kind of like kind of jump in and double click where you'd like, but the reason I loved what you're doing with this podcast was that one of the things that gave me the strength and I guess the courage to even and just like the knowledge of what to do was a friend of mine on Facebook. His name's Bang, and he was posting about his journey of taking medication for ADHD, and he was being just wildly vulnerable, just sharing out into the Facebook void of like, hey, I'm afraid of taking this. I think my personality is going to get muted. I think, the Bang who I love and know, and he was talking about himself, is just going to kind of disappear, and I'm just going to turn into this drone, right? And that was the scary part for him, and I shared that fear. Like, there's a lot of things that I love about myself, and then there's a lot of things that bring a ton of challenge into my life, and I just couldn't go on without trying something different, I suppose. So I'll kind of tie it off there, and you can double click wherever you like.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your story. It does take a lot of vulnerability, and that is just a big theme and a key theme that has resonated with so many, where people are listening to the vulnerable stories and are feeling a nudge inside of them as well to say, hey, maybe it's time to share my story. And we all have different reasons to share. And I'm curious I've got a couple questions, but I'm curious, why now? What makes you lean into sharing your story and not, you've got your diagnosis, take your meds and continue on with your day?
If Bang didn't share his story, I don't know that I would have looked into. I wouldn't call taking meds a dance floor, but if I hadn't have seen that, it was a way of him sort of welcoming others onto the dance floor of just like, no, it's okay to like go here. It's okay to feel afraid. You're not the only one who is afraid going through this. And everything he was saying resonated with me specifically. And I think oftentimes it's like, that's such a translatable human emotion. Anything that you're afraid of, you often think you're isolated in it, and for a lot of reasons, it's at first it's true, but then you share it and then you realize other people are going through similar things, and that's really empowering, I think. And
It's hugely.
I didn't want to it feels wrong to not pay it forward, so that if someone else sees this and they reach out, or it gives them, like, hey, you know what, I'm going to go check it out. Like, that's all that I think matters.
I had a previous guest talk about permission. And one of the reasons why he shares his story is similar to what you're saying, is it almost unlocks permission for people, right?
Yeah.
We're diagnosed with something. We're going through a health crisis, or we're going through something, and it feels so lonely. Even when we're surrounded by friends and family and a partner and kids, it still feels so lonely. And throwing it out there into, as you said, the void of Facebook or void of social media, the amount of support that just comes in, and the amount of questions and people who care, complete strangers, it's empowering. And I mean, one of the purposes here at Invisible Condition is to ignite social change, and it does. It starts that, it catalysts that. But I just want to backtrack a little bit.
Yeah.
You're saying, hey, you're working on this presentation, you've noticed a pattern, you're down to the wire getting it done. You've noticed, and you notice this pattern. I'm curious, what made you say, okay, this isn't right, or I feel that this could be done differently? Did you notice that pattern previously in life or throughout, like, putting together presentations, and what was the catalyst now? Was it that Facebook post, or had you seen it yet?
Yeah, I would say, I don't know. I think I saw it, and it was a seed that needed watering. And I think that breaking point was sadly the water. Maybe the tears kind of like watered that seed. But had I not seen that, I don't know that I would have connected his experience and his fears to, and I just would have kept on going and like suffering mentally from like project to project, and it would have negatively impacted my work. So the fear of like, I've got a family now, it's not just me and my partner, it's me, my partner, and our daughters, and there's a lot more on the line. So even though I was trying harder than I'd ever tried in my life before, it was just like running into a brick wall mentally over and over again. Just like, something has to change. I have to address this thing that I used to address in other unhealthy ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's those things that they just don't go away, right? You try different coping mechanisms, what worked for you, or you tried that, masked it, but it's still there. And yeah, so you pursued that diagnosis. When you received that diagnosis, how did you feel?
It was really, I don't want to say comforting. I don't even want to say like a sense of relief, because with that relief, let's say, there was immediately, oh, now I have a stigma. Sorry, I didn't ask if we could swear, but that's what went through my mind. It was like immediate relief, and then immediate, I don't know what it was, but it wasn't just pure relief, because now I'm officially someone that has ADHD. And what does this mean? Does it define me? It explains a lot. I have answers for a lot. Is it going to be my excuse now? Is it the thing that I tell other people overtly? Are they going to judge me? Do I tell future employers about it? It's all of those kind of questions and concerns washed over me in terms of, but it also was like, okay, now I have a framework in which to approach a lot of the challenges in my life. And if I approach it from the framework of that, maybe I'll have better luck with some of the things that I'm trying to accomplish.
I'm curious about some of the words that you use. I'm just looking at my notes. Is this an excuse? And I'm curious about that emotion or that thought that had come up. Yeah, tell me a little bit more about that if you can.
Yeah, so the weird thing with ADHD is that the behaviors end up looking a lot like laziness or rudeness, right? Like, if I'm in a conversation and my mind is somewhere else, I might be nodding and inattentive, literally inattentive. There's inattentive and hyperactive, right? So like space cadet, or just in my own mind, and you might be telling me something, and that thing might be like, okay, on Sunday you need to pick up the girls at 4 p.m. and I wasn't there for that conversation, right? And if you think about how often that happens, whether in a relationship or you have a relationship with your employer or your boss or whatever. It's like, if you're not present for critical information, it's not a good thing, right? And so the word excuse came from like, well, now I have this excuse, now I have this reason, but do I lean on it? Can I lean on it? Is it something I even want to lean on? That's kind of where that word came from for me.
Yeah, I can imagine your partner, if you did not pick up the kids, or they're, I just have this image of your daughter standing on the sidewalk just looking both ways. So where's dad? And using it as an excuse. I don't know if that would fly. And I can relate to that living with Crohn. Sometimes I try to use that as an excuse and as an out. But
Yeah.
my wife holds me deeply accountable too. Saying, no, that's, you need to be, you need to make sure you're paying attention. You make sure this isn't just a reason to like not want to hang out with the kids or not want to do something. It's like, oh, I don't want to go to that party because I've got Crohn's. And sometimes my
Yeah.
wife's like, well, you're always going to have Crohn's. So maybe it's time we go. And yeah, I think it's straight. It's, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to generalize it. At least for me, and it sounds like potentially for you, it can be an excuse. And I think we need to be aware of that.
Yeah. Yeah. It on the ADHD side, it absolutely can be. It's easy to be. Oh, right. Similarly, and gratefully, my wife has a ton of patience with me, and getting a shared language around what's going on at times, like hyperfixation. She's like, you'll go downstairs without announcing it, and you just won't come back upstairs, even though you said you were gonna go switch over the laundry. Like, I'm gonna go switch over the laundry, and on the way there's 15 things that catch my attention, and one of those things could be something that I just hyperfixate on, and I end up fixing some of the plumbing in the bathroom because I noticed something was, and I just completely lose track of time. And if I don't like announce it, there's sort of this like, hey, I was, expecting you to mind the kids with me for a little bit so I could get something of my own done. And to her, it might feel like I'm disrespecting her time, or just arbitrarily leaving her up there. And that's never the intention, but that's what it feels like. And that's the reality of it. Right. And in those moments, I could pass it off as like, well, I've got this ADHD thing, so you're just going to have to deal with it. That's not the case. No, like I have to come up with different ways. Like, the amount of alarms on my phone that go off to like remind me that it's like 3:00. So in 20 minutes, you're going to go need to pick up your daughter from school. I've got 3 or 4. And even though I have those 3 or 4, sometimes like, I'm like, I'm just going to finish this email, or I'm just going to finish reading this thing. And sometimes I'm running from the house to go pick up my daughter. And thankfully, I haven't been crazy late, or I've never seen that, like, but that there's an extra level of accountability that comes with, a little one, right? And that's made it's been something that's really forced me to kind of like address a lot of the challenges, because I couldn't function in the way that I was previously, for sure.
Yeah. I hear you on that. You also said something that has caught my attention, and I know others have talked about it. Actually, others have said, I don't want to share my story because I'm afraid of this. And that is employers. Do I tell other employers? Well, we're on a podcast. Maybe they'll listen to it. Maybe they'll see it on social media, on LinkedIn, because I'm going to post it out, because I'm honored that you are sharing your story. I think there's so much power in sharing your story, but there's so much fear. I know there's shame and fear that often hold us back. So what do you say to someone, let's from the perspective of somebody who's, do I tell a future employer? And then I want to switch the perspective of, hey, if you are a future employer, because I want to hear your perspective on that. So yeah, I'm curious. Do you tell a future employer, or somebody's afraid to share their story or to tell their story? What do you say to that?
Well, I want to address like my privilege, uh, in that there's a there's a bunch, right? You know, my skin tone, my gender, that already gives me a bunch of privilege, and having a invisible condition uh, is a challenge, but um, there's a lot of things that have come easier to me because of that, and I can't necessarily ignore it. So my answer to this kind of has to be seen with that lens, in the sense that I'm very lucky to have started the community that I have, 7 years ago. And so for me to think, okay, if I'm open and honest about this, what does that do? Um, right now I'm relying on myself to generate income. I'm building a business. Do I know where my next paycheck is going to come from? To a degree, but is it consistent? No, I'm a consultant. So things kind of work in quarterly basis. When I was employed, um, I didn't, when I got my diagnosis, I told a few people on my team, like people that were reporting into me, let them know that I was like figuring it out. But it wasn't it wasn't something I did lightly, like, oh cool, I'm just going to do this. Like, it was pretty terrifying. It was scary. But I kind of thought back to, I don't want to hide this, because if I do, it sort of feels disingenuous. But on the flip side, not everybody has built a community that they can just, reach out to and say, hey, I lost my job for whatever reason. I'm looking for work. And because of the work that I've done in the community, I would be pretty, it would be easier for me to find something than had I not built it. Like, that's a very unique circumstance, I think. And so the question of, should you be transparent with an employer? I struggle with that, because I think there's a time and a place where you will feel comfortable enough to do so, and you will know those moments. And in some of those moments, you might find out the hard way that wasn't, you shouldn't have trusted that individual with that information, because they didn't actually realize it. And I don't think the way the relationship between an employer and employee is built in a way that truly supports people with, like, there's a certain sense of normal that companies want. And it is inconvenient to an organization for an individual to just not be performing at 100% all the time, or inconvenient. And I haven't seen, I've seen a lot of hope from like a modern HR practice perspective, where a lot of people in HR are really advocating for people when they come to them and say, hey, listen, I've got this thing and I need support from my employer. But then you look on the other side of things and you see people posting online, and they might not even have an invisible condition. They might not even have a visible, like they might not be, and they're, the employer employee relationship still hasn't gotten to this like place of like, yeah, we figured this out and most companies do it pretty well. Like, unfortunately, that's not the case. Like, the great places to work are few and far between, I think, in terms of like really being welcoming to that sort of thing. And that's a little bit of a pessimistic view, but I think unless you are, especially in like the market today, in terms of like, I'm looking at this from the lens of like the startup and tech community, but if unless you're super confident that you can just find another opportunity at a moment's notice, it, or you have something to lean on, like I would only really share it if you are in a place where you can afford to, because I haven't seen a ton of acceptance. And maybe you have someone individually at the organizations who's understanding, but companies are large and complex, and your manager might change and someone might share the information if you become more open about it. You know, I was open about it with my team. I don't know if that was the cause of, like, I don't know if that played a part in me getting laid off. I don't think it was, but I'm sure somewhere in the back of someone's mind, they could have looked back on some of the, uh, you know, things that I'd maybe didn't get done quick enough or didn't turn around quick enough and said, okay, well, you know, maybe we don't need to. So that's a long answer and it's a tricky one. I think the short version is you'll know when it's right for yourself, I think.
Yeah, I appreciate you call it a pessimistic view. I call it a realistic view. It's a realist view where, you know, it's a pretty general question. I realize asking, hey, you know, should you share? It depends on the circumstance. It depends on your team. It depends on your organization.
Yeah.
There's so many factors that go into it. Some have the opportunity to have time on their side to share when they're comfortable. Some don't. I had to share with an organization because I was in the hospital. And I was like, phone up my boss. I was like, hey, I'm not going to be in because, you know, my bowels exploded and I'm going to be in the hospital for a little bit. You know, they reacted very positively, but I've also heard many stories of companies and organizations not reacting positively.
Yeah.
And it's scary. There's also, you know, it's an individual's choice. And I would say if it is affecting your performances, if it's affecting your ability to do the job, maybe it's time to have a conversation with someone, whether it's HR, whether it's your leader, and be open and honest about it, about what's going on. Because the last thing we want is for someone to not step into that vulnerability and end up losing a job. And so, you know, there is power in that voice, and it kind of leads to the next question, which is something that's been on my mind for about a month now, is this term self-advocacy. Because, you know, you're a father, I'm a father. I think of a world where, you know, my kids are a little bit older than yours, but a world where if they live with something that's invisible, how do we want to encourage them to advocate for themselves and step into, let's say that they're diagnosed with something. And, you know, I'm curious when you hear that, especially, you know, when I talk about my kids in that way, I just, you know, it makes lots of emotions come up. And what's coming up for you in that world of self-advocacy and thinking of the future?
My daughter this morning asked me, like, Daddy, why are we always like rushing to school? And like part of it is just, you know, she doesn't put her jacket on and she wants to do a million other things before we leave the house for school and whatnot. Another part of it is like, I probably could have managed my time a little better. Maybe I shouldn't have made my coffee. Maybe I should have just like been more of a more forceful in like, okay, cool, let's get your jacket on and your boots on and let's go kind of thing, right? And on the way, I was, you know, there are books. For sure there's books on how to be a parent. I haven't read any of them, partially because, you know, my attention span for that stuff isn't that great. but the other, like, I learn best through experience, and discussion, which is why I enjoy these conversations and talking about it with other people. But the self-advocacy piece, and the thing I thought in that moment, when she asked me that question, I'm like, well, Daddy's brain works a little bit differently sometimes. And it's like, I also told her, I'm like, you also just need to, like, put your jacket on a little bit quicker and faster sometimes. And, like, part of that's me and part of that's you, and it's a two-way street, and we're a team. But I kind of gave her a sneak preview into the fact that, like, yeah, my brain works a little bit differently. Sometimes people remember everything, and sometimes Daddy doesn't. And sometimes Daddy doesn't remember important things. And that's hard. And I think it was more of like a foreshadowing to her that, like, hey, this is a thing. There's a lot of guilt and shame that comes with ADHD, because the end result is disappointing to others when things go poorly. And so that having happened so many times, you just build it up over time, and it always comes back to yourself. So the self-advocacy piece, I think, for me, and if I'm going off track here, feel free to nudge me in the right direction, but it kind of goes back to wanting to pay it forward. Like, always goes back to that, like, had Bang not shared his experiences on Facebook, I don't feel like I would have dove in and researched and felt comfortable, because he was sharing sort of like a video blog, and he was saying, like, hey, I didn't lose that part of me that I felt really attached to, like the fun and personable and kooky crazy side. He didn't turn into, like, the mindless drone that he was worried about in terms of, like, taking the medication and being, like, muted from a personality perspective. And that gave me permission to sort of explore it further, reduced some of the fear in it. So if it feels disrespectful to not, maybe I'm misunderstanding here. Now I'm realizing it. I've probably gone a little bit of a tangent, but yeah, that's where my mind went when you asked that.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's too far off on a tangent. I think, I could just picture your daughter asking, why are we always rushing? And part of self-advocacy to me is being open and honest, even with the littles in our family, in our lives, in our family.
The littles, yeah.
With my kids, my daughter is 6, and she's asked me, well, why are you always running to the washroom before we leave the house? And I need to explain to her that if I don't, we will likely need to stop somewhere along the way, whether we're going for a walk or a drive, for me to rush into a washroom, because my bowels work differently. And, then we'll crack a few jokes. If you ever meet my daughter, she's very sarcastic at 6 and likes to joke around. And so we have some fun with that. But it's being open and honest. And then it's also telling people what we need. So, like with your daughter, it's, hey, we're working as a team. This is what we need. And I tell people, like, hey, if you're going to advocate for yourself at the doctors, you got to be crystal clear on what's happening and crystal clear what you need. And same with our kids, same with the little people in our lives, the friends, the family, because they can't read our minds. Nobody can read our minds. If somebody says, hey, I can read your mind, they're wrong. Challenge that, have fun with it. I think that'd be a fun conversation. But I think it's a large part of it, especially with our kids. It's not shying away from what's going on and what makes us our quote unquote normal. Because your brain works differently than your daughter's, works differently than, and your partner's works differently than mine. And owning that, stepping into it, I think there's power in that.
Yeah. I understand the question a bit better now. And I would say, to add to what my answer was, on the advocacy piece, I'll give an example that's a funny story now. So I was invited to speak at a HR tech conference in San Francisco. No, I just made the mistake again. No, San Jose. And I was going to buy tickets, and my wife's like, "Oh, it would be fun." And this was before kids. So he's like, "Oh, it'd be fun if I flew down at the same time, and I go do my thing, and then we could meet up after your speaking engagement and make like a weekend trip out of it." And I was like, "Okay, yeah, that's cool." She's like, "Cool. I'm gonna buy tickets. I'm buying tickets. It's coming up in a month now. I'd like to buy some airline tickets." And for me, I'm like, even just the concept of like the time window, I'm like, "Oh, it should be cheaper. Flights should be cheaper when because it's and that's not how flight tickets work." But she's like, "I'm buying a ticket, and so you buy your own ticket, and if we're on the same flight, great." And that was like a little bit of a sticking point. So came like a week before, like a few days before, and I'm buying my tickets to go there at like double the price, which is already like a stupid thing in the first place. And turns out she was like, "Oh, when are you flying into?" And I'm like, "Oh, I fly into this airport, at this time." She's like, "What did you say?" I'm like, "Yeah, like." She's like, that's San Diego. I got tickets to San Jose." Oh, mixed up the sands. San Francisco, San Diego, San Jose. Mixed them up, didn't give you the right information. You're flying to a city on the same day that I am, but it's just 4 hours away from the city that I'm going to. Wonderful. The fact that I'm still married out of that mistake is a testament to how awesome and patient and kind my partner is after that experience. Once we got through some of the more challenging aspects, like, making a mistake like that, I started to dig in a little bit more. And I'm like, well, you do everything analog, right? Her diary is either in her head, her calendar, her appointments and who we're seeing next weekend is in her head. And everything for me is digital. And if it's not in the calendar, it doesn't actually exist for me. It's not real, essentially. And so the biggest fix to our relationship and some of our biggest challenges and fights and arguments was us sitting down and saying, "Okay, so this part of me doesn't work in the same way, and so my my ask of you is that like you start using the digital calendar, and the where I will meet you in the middle to a certain extent is I'll try to keep the whiteboard calendar that you use more up to date." And that was a good moment for us to realize, like, okay, we need to work together more on some of these operational logistic things as a couple. You throw kids into that and all the appointments and dates and times, and like you can there's a level of like every once in a while now I get to say like, "Okay, sorry, I didn't hear anything you just said, not intentional." And she like, "Can you say that again?" And I'm going to put this into my phone now. And if she sees me doing that, she knows that like the chances of me doing the right thing at the right time just exponentially increase.
Okay, a couple things are coming up is, okay, I like applaud your partner, for sticking with you. It's like, I'm just flying to a completely different city. Sorry about that. Oops, my mistake. And but then being able to reconcile that and sitting down and saying, okay, even self-advocacy doesn't have to be necessarily outside of our homes with doctors and workplaces and things like that. It's also with the people that are close to us. Is, hey, this is what I need, and hearing the reciprocating, this is what I need from our partners, from our friends, and meeting in the middle, like having that open dialogue. is so key to relationship, and it unlocks just a deeper level of friendship and with our friends, with our partners, with our family. Would you agree?
Yeah. Now me and Karina end up going to the same place most of the time.
Most of the time. I'm so curious to hear her perspective of the story. Maybe I'll have to ask her or get her contacted,
She
and we'll
tells it
record that.
regularly.
Yeah,
She tells it regularly. Yeah.
yeah. Which San are we going to? Yeah, San Jose, San Francisco, San Diego. Yeah,
I blame
San Antonio.
California,
Yeah,
really. This isn't a me problem. It's a California problem. Like, who
it
does
it
that, honestly?
it is. For the best of us, like, yeah, I can imagine. If I was to go book tickets, I'd probably mess that up too. And um, it is a California. We're gonna write a letter. I'll write a letter after this, and I'll put it into Chat GPT and see what comes out, and see if we can start a petition and change California.
You've
Well,
got your first signer here.
yeah, I love it. Well, Martin, I really appreciate you. I appreciate your openness, your vulnerability, your demeanor in how you tell your story is something that is honestly, it's inspiring to me. And for those who are listening, who are thinking, and maybe it's time to tell my story, um, how would you encourage someone to even start?
Start telling their own story.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my initial thought was like, only do what's comfortable. And then immediately my mind's like, growth doesn't really come through comfort. So does it mean like jumping onto a podcast right off the bat? Like, it really depends on where and into classic HR answer, right? It depends. Um, but I would say it depends on where you're at. I think I'm really grateful that I've gotten to a place where I do feel comfortable. This is like, I'm not like, oh, this is great. Like, there's a sense of nervousness. There's a sense of like, oh, did I do the right thing? Am I doing, like, I'm starting a business. Maybe I shouldn't put this out there so openly. And then there's another part of me that says, I have gotten so far already and I've been pretty transparent. If I can keep making it okay for others to share, or muster up some courage to maybe just tell a friend or a family member or a boss, or like, it's not going to be easy, but I think if you start trying in small ways and you do it consistently, one day you'll end up looking back and sort of laughing at yourself that you thought it was so scary at the time. And that's kind of what happens with everything, I think. So
Yeah, there's discomfort in stepping out, and I love what you said. Growth doesn't come through comfort. And so if you're listening to this, maybe it's an opportunity to get uncomfortable, and it might be for selfish reasons, and I applaud you for that. And it might be for reasons where out of necessity, and I applaud you for that. So lots of good insight in that, Martin. So as we wrap up, I'm curious if somebody wants to know more, wants to connect with you, wants to hear more about your journey, and maybe dig into some of the insights you shared, where can people reach you?
yeah, find me at LinkedIn, probably the best, easiest way, as a recruiter by trade. That's Martin Hauck, Hauck. And find me on LinkedIn. Yeah, that's the easiest way. Martin Hauck.ca as well. Kind of shows you all the things. I just recently got rid of Instagram for obvious reasons. Spending way too much time there, just going down like those stories and the algorithms. They're just getting bananas for attention spans. ADHD or not, it's just concerning. So I'm no longer on the Insta, and you can find me on you can find me on LinkedIn.
Sounds good. Well, I'll put your links in the show notes as well. And again, thank you for opening up honestly and vulnerably, your journey of diagnosis with inattentive ADHD, and your journey with as a father, and sharing with your kids, and as well as I hope your next trip with your wife, with your partner, you end up at the same place, and if not, I hope you have a good 2 separate trips. Yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
I love it.
There's the bright side to it, right? Oh, how was your vacation? Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, you could divide and conquer. You can see a lot of the world, right? If you just took us to the wrong place. No, I don't think so.
Not going to work that way now.
Well, again, thanks for coming on. And for those who are listening, I love it when you shoot me an email, shoot me a message, whether it's through the website or social, and just tell me what you thought about this week's episode. Also, what really helps the podcast get noticed is if you take a moment and just give us a rating and write a review. And if it's a terrible review, if you're not enjoying it, just shoot me a message. I would appreciate that, and instead of posting it publicly. But hey, if you want to do that too, I don't hold back. And with that, I just hope everyone has an amazing day. And again, thanks, Martin, for coming on.
Thank you, Tim.